Welcome, curious explorers. Today we are really diving into some fascinating source material, stuff that blends the really personal, like psychic flashes, with the truly cosmic. Huge ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Our mission today is basically to unpack this one extraordinary evening of channeled communication. We're focusing entirely on session 42 of the early sessions, book 1 of Seth material.
And that was recorded on Wednesday, April 8, 1964. It's amazing stuff. It really promises shortcuts to knowledge, showing that, not everything has to be just blindly accepted.
Exactly. Seth himself talks about practicalities. And just so everyone knows, this deep dive is being distributed free of charge on all major platforms, purely for educational purposes. We're sticking strictly to the source texts provided.
Okay, so where are we starting? We've got this personal psychic event and then a critique of cosmology. That sounds like quite a jump.
It is, but it flows naturally. This session gives really powerful evidence for that idea of practicalities, inner data being verifiable. We'll look at how the ego controls these things and then shift to Seth's pretty radical take on the universe.
Radical is probably an understatement, from what I recall.
Oh, yeah. And we should keep the tone in mind, too. Seth himself admits later he says he has fluctuations of interest. Sometimes he's all about the hard facts. Other times he's in a more humorous mood.
Right. So we should aim for that kind of vibe, too.
Yeah.
Serious insights, but also maybe a bit of that interdimensional humor.
Definitely. Let's try and capture that blend.
Okay, so practicalities. Let's ground this. Where does this session start? It's not some grand cosmic vision initially, is it?
No, not at all. It's wonderfully mundane, actually. The context is the Chemung County Artists Show. Joseph had just won an award for a portrait.
Sure.
And Jane, who Seth calls Ruburt, of course, she was working part-time at the gallery where the show was held. So they needed to know the time, basically, figure out when to get ready to go out that evening. Just a normal, everyday situation.
Right. The simple need to know what time it is. We've all been there.
Exactly. And that becomes the trigger. Jane lies down for a nap, trying to rest up a bit. She's not fully asleep, just in that drowsy, half-awake state. You know the one?
Mm-hmm. That sort of floaty place.
Yeah. And as she's lying there, she just casually wonders, what time is it? Just a thought floating through her mind.
An unconscious request, almost.
Precisely. And this simple internal question sets off something. Pretty amazing. Her eyes are closed, remember? But she sees this kind of veil of light form in her inner vision.
Okay, a veil of light.
And within that light, she clearly sees Joseph's studio clock, the actual physical clock. And she sees the time, 6:50 p.m., perfectly clear.
Wow. But the crucial detail.
The clock wasn't in the room with her. It was in the studio, which was next door, past their living room. No way she could physically see it.
So a direct inner perception bypassing walls and distance. And did it turn out to be accurate?
It did. She sort of dozed for a few more minutes, just trusting that inner time check. Then, when she finally asked Joseph out loud, he looked and confirmed the time was actually 7:00 p.m.
So within 10 minutes. That's remarkably accurate for something perceived psychically.
It really is. And that's why Seth jumps on this. This is his proof of practicalities. Right. He uses this specific verifiable event to say, look, this isn't all just theory or faith.
Right. He says something like, they deal in practicalities too.
Exactly. His quote is, they would also deal in practicalities and that everything concerning our discussions did not have to be taken on faith alone. This clock vision is Exhibit A.
But it makes you wonder, if this inner sight is so good, better than physical sight, in this case, why aren't we using it all the time? Why are our physical senses so dominant?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the session digs right into that. Seth calls Jane's experience a direct experience of a vivid nature, and he stresses that it was at least as legitimate and valid as more ordinary sensual data.
Even more valid in a way, since it overcame physical limits.
Precisely. He points out, but in this instance, the vision was much better, you must admit, than it is with ordinary eyesight, since the clock that Ruburt saw well enough to tell the time was not even in the same room. The inner senses just play by different rules.
Okay, so how did it work? What's the mechanism Seth describes, this metaphysical ninja move, as you put it earlier?
Yeah, it boils down to the ego taking a brief nap, essentially. Seth says the conscious mind, the outer ego, was caught unawares because Ruburt was drowsy.
Okay, so the guard was down.
Right. And in that state, she unknowingly requested the info, the time. The request went straight to the subconscious or the inner self, whatever term you prefer.
And because the usual controller, the ego, wasn't actively managing things.
The subconscious was free from impediments. It just accessed the information where the clock was, what time it showed, and delivered it back through the inner senses, translating it into that clear image of the clock face.
Simple, direct, efficient. When the ego's out of the way.
Exactly. It's all about detachment. And the contrast proves the point. Later that evening, just before the actual session started, Jane tried consciously to do it again. She lay down, tried to nap, saw the veil of light again, but couldn't get the time. Nothing. The moment she tried to will it, to force the experience...
The ego kicked back in, right, and slammed the door shut.
That's the classic pattern. Trying too hard engages the controller. And Seth adds this little teaser, this hook for later material. He says the inner sense used for that clock vision was a new one they hadn't discussed yet.
Oh?
Yeah, he calls it one of the most basic and says it's necessary for the inner senses involved in transportation.
Whoa, okay, so seeing a clock in the next room uses the same fundamental sense as, like, out-of-body travel.
That seems to be the implication. It's all interconnected. Even simple perception has these deeper roots in non-physical mechanics.
Okay, so that naturally leads us to the big question. Why are these experiences so elusive if the mechanism is just letting go?
Well, just letting go sounds simple, but it's incredibly hard for us, isn't it? Seth is very clear. These experiences cannot be willed. Trying to use the ego's usual toolkit force, intense concentration, striving actually prevents them. It holds you back.
Right. It's like trying to grab smoke.
Yeah.
The harder you squeeze, the less you have.
Exactly. And Seth uses this brilliant analogy. He says the feeling right before a session, that kind of nervous anticipation, is like being an inexperienced diver standing upon a high board.
Oh, I can feel that pit in your stomach. You want to jump, but everything's screaming, no!
Yeah, you're up high, you know the water's down there, but there's this huge resistance. And what's the only solution?
You just have to. Jump, let go.
The best way is just to let go and dive. It's the perfect metaphor for the paradox here. You achieve control by relinquishing willful control, by trusting the process, allowing, as Seth puts it, certain inner disciplines that have been learned are given free rein.
So it's a learned discipline of surrender, almost. Letting go of the need to micromanage the experience.
Precisely. And this relates to the ego's role. Seth describes two main ways the ego interacts with inner data. First, there's the state Jane was in during this successful clock vision. He calls this the ego as observer.
Okay, what did that mean?
It means the ego momentarily suspends its rigid judgments. It steps back a little, allows the inner experience to happen, lets the data flow through, but it remains aware. It's observing without interfering.
So you get the information, the time on the clock, and you consciously register it. That's the ideal state for channeling or psychic insight, right?
Yeah.
Aware, but not controlling.
Exactly. That's the goal. But then there's the other state, ego subjugated. This is like deep sleep or maybe even blackout states during trance.
So the ego is completely offline.
Pretty much. And in that state, direct experience through the inner senses definitely still happens. The inner self is perceiving reality directly. But because the ego isn't there to record or filter it into conscious awareness...
You don't remember it when you wake up. You experienced it, but you don't know you experienced it.
Right. There's no conscious takeaway, which is why the observer state is more useful for learning and integration. The trouble is, the ego is programmed for physical survival. It's a specialist in navigating this reality.
So the moment something non-physical pops up,
it freaks out. Seth says the ego almost immediately clamps down to examine the phenomena. It's like a security guard seeing something weird on the monitor, immediate lockdown. It has to analyze, categorize, and usually dismiss anything that doesn't fit the physical rules.
Which brings us to the ultimate rule breaker. Levitation.
Yeah, and I love Seth's approach here. It's so practical, almost dismissive of the wow factor. He says levitation as such has little value. He's not interested in the party trick.
He's interested in why it's so difficult.
Exactly. He says it's difficult not because it's inherently impossible, but because the idea of it instantly triggers a massive panic response in the ego. The ego stiffens its control immediately.
Why such a strong reaction? More than just seeing a clock.
Because levitation is a blatant, undeniable violation of a core physical law, gravity. And the ego's prime directive is physical survival, which depends on obeying what Seth calls the camouflage necessities. The physical laws are the camouflage.
So if a law like gravity is broken, the ego sees it as a fundamental threat, like the whole system might collapse.
That seems to be the idea. It rises up in arms. Any deviation from the agreed-upon rules of physical reality is perceived as dangerous to the body's integrity, to its existence within that reality.
Wow. So the ego acts like the ultimate enforcer of the physical illusion.
Yes, it protects the camouflage by shutting down anything that threatens to expose it as camouflage. And this very mechanism protecting the body by enforcing the rules is the perfect springboard for Seth to challenge the biggest rules we think we know, the rules of the cosmos itself.
Okay, so the ego clamps down hard when physical laws are threatened.
Yeah.
Now let's scale that up, way up. You mentioned Joseph and Jane had been discussing a science article.
Yeah, right before the session. A piece in Time magazine about the discovery of what was then the most distant galaxy ever observed. And it was apparently moving away from us at a staggering speed, 76,000 miles per second.
Which naturally scientists would see as strong evidence for the expanding universe theory, right? Everything flying apart from a central point.
That's the standard interpretation. But Seth, well, he doesn't just question the interpretation. He basically dismisses the whole concept out of hand. He calls the idea that the universe is expanding into nowhere like an inflated balloon that grows forever larger, fundamentally flawed.
Whoa. Okay, so if it's not expanding, what does he say is happening?
His core statement is incredibly profound and maybe a little chilling. The universe is continually being created.
Continually created. Not exploded outwards once, but constantly emerging.
That's the idea. He argues that the appearance of expansion, the redshift and velocities that scientists measure, isn't literal movement through empty space. He says it's distortive for many reasons.
Distortive. Okay, what's causing the distortion, according to Seth? Where does the error come in?
He points the finger squarely at our concept of time. He says the measurements based on the camouflage idea of time, meaning our linear sequential time, are almost riotously inadequate and bound to give distortive data.
Riotously inadequate. That's strong language. How does linear time mess up the calculation so badly that it looks like something's moving at 76,000 miles per second?
Because linear time implies a sequence, a past, present, future flow, and movement through space over that time. Scientists measure light, assume it traveled linearly across space for billions of years, and calculate speed based on that assumption. But Seth says time, as you think of it, does not exist in any real terms.
So if our fundamental rule of time is wrong, the measurement is meaningless.
Or at least it measures something different from what we think it measures. If time is just a local camouflage rule for our specific reality.
Then space must be too, right?
Exactly. Seth says space itself is also a camouflage. We tend to think of it as this empty, passive, three-dimensional container. A void.
Yeah, emptiness waiting to be filled or traveled through.
But Seth completely flips that. He defines space as the fifth dimension. And crucially, it's not an emptiness, it's alive and vibrant.
Alive. Space itself is alive, not just the stuff in space.
That's what he says. It's a vibrant, active medium, not a passive void. And if space isn't empty, then the whole idea of expansion into empty space just collapses. It doesn't make sense in his model.
Okay, my head hurts a little. So if it's not expansion, what are scientists observing with their telescopes and instruments? That redshift, that apparent velocity, where does it come from?
Seth attributes it to a combination of factors, all rooted in our limited perspective. He says the evidence comes from 1, camouflage instruments, tools designed to measure reality according to the physical rules.
Okay.
2, those distortive ideas of time we just talked about.
Right.
And 3, the resulting cause and effect theory that arises from those limited ideas. Basically, you're using tools built for the camouflage, applying a flawed concept of time, and logically deducing a cause, expansion, that fits those flawed premises.
So we're measuring distortions within the camouflage and mistaking them for objective reality.
That's the essence of it. And right after dropping this cosmological bombshell, Seth delivers one of his classic, slightly humorous lines to give them a moment to process. He just says, "I suggest you take a break in your expanding universe."
Perfect timing. A mental palate cleanser before diving even deeper, I imagine.
Exactly. A break was definitely needed at that point.
Okay, break's over. If the universe isn't a single expanding balloon, what's the alternative model Seth offers? You mentioned planes earlier.
Right. He comes back to this core concept. Reality isn't singular. The universe contains innumerable planes. And he emphasizes again, a plane isn't necessarily a physical place like another planet or galaxy. It's more like a distinct system of reality with its own rules of perception.
And these planes, they're separate or interacting.
They're interacting, and crucially, they're coexisting. He says they are all taking up, in your terms, the same amount of space.
Okay, so multiple realities layered right here, right now, occupying the same location, but vibrating maybe at different frequencies or following different rules. Like radio stations all broadcasting in the same room, but you only hear the one you're tuned to.
That's a really good way to think about it, yeah. We're tuned to the physical reality station, and because these planes are different reality structures, the forms within them appear differently depending on which plane is doing the observing.
What does that mean, practically?
Well, Seth gives examples. What we see as a solid object, like, say, this table might just be perceived as an electrical unit in another plane, or maybe just as pure color on a third.
So solidity, form, even matter itself is relative to the plane you're perceiving from. It's part of our specific camouflage rules.
Exactly, and these planes aren't isolated bubbles. Seth stresses there's a continual exchange of energy and vitality between them. He even implies that actual atoms and molecules are constantly shifting, moving from one plane to another.
Whoa. So reality is porous. Things are bleeding through between dimensions all the time.
That's the picture he paints. It's a dynamic, fluid multiverse, not static layers. Think of it like constant energetic breathing between realities. Our universe is just one system participating in this vast exchange.
Okay, if all these different realities are constantly interacting and moving and exchanging energy, wouldn't that create some kind of interference, like static between radio stations?
It absolutely does. And that's the key to understanding the expansion illusion. Seth calls the results of this interplane interaction distortive boundaries or effects.
Distortive boundaries, so like friction zones where realities meet.
Sort of. Think of it as the visible side effects of these immense systems rubbing up against each other. It's the noise generated at the edges where different reality structures interact.
And these aren't like physical walls in space.
No, he suggests they might appear differently depending on the plane, maybe like a flow, like a current,
Yeah.
or like an electrical charge. But the crucial thing is, on each plane, these universal boundary effects manifest according to that plane's specific camouflage.
So for us, these boundary effects show up
As things that seem like immutable physical laws, like the way light behaves over vast distances, leading to interpretations of velocity and expansion. Our physical senses evolved specifically to navigate our camouflage.
so they're designed to perceive the effects, the distortions, as real. They confirm the boundaries instead of seeing past them.
Exactly. Seth says it's almost impossible to see beyond these boundary effects using just our ordinary outer senses. They lock us into the local rules.
Which brings us back full circle to the expanding universe. How does this boundary effect explain that apparent 76,000 miles per second?
Seth uses a really brilliant analogy here, the water reflection analogy. It ties it all together.
Okay, I remember this one. It's about misinterpreting what you see.
Precisely. He likens the distortive effect the thing scientists are measuring to the reflection of a solid tree in water.
Let's break that down. The solid tree is what? The actual galaxy, the true reality.
Yes, the galaxy or phenomenon as it exists beyond our plane's distortions. The water represents the medium of interaction between planes, the source of the distortive boundary effect. It creates the reflection.
Okay, and the reflection is what our instruments pick up the distorted light, the apparent velocity.
Right. And what do the scientists, using their camouflage instruments, do? They observe the shimmering, moving reflection in the water. And they try to judge the depth of the water, which represents space in our terms, by the apparent height or movement of the reflected tree.
They're assuming the reflection perfectly mirrors the real object and that its apparent properties tell you about the medium space it's reflected in.
Exactly. They're measuring the properties of a distortion, the reflection, and using that to make assumptions about the nature of space and the object itself. They mistake the reflection's apparent speed for the true object's speed.
So the faster a galaxy appears to be moving away might just mean the boundary effect between planes in that direction is deeper or more distorting, not that the galaxy itself is physically racing away.
That's the implication. It's an interpretation based on observing a reflection through the lens of our limited camouflage rules. And the results, as Seth says, are riotously inadequate for understanding the true picture.
Wow. Okay. After basically rewriting cosmology, it's almost grounding to remember the humans involved. The session notes mentioned Jane and Joseph were pretty drained.
Oh, yeah. They were somewhat tired, apparently fighting to keep their eyes open. They felt like energy was literally being taken from us. It really underscores that channeling this kind of dense reality-bending material takes a physical toll.
It's not just words flowing through, it's an energy transaction.
Definitely. And Seth acknowledges it directly. He notes that he operates through their combined energies. He also points out that Ruburt, Jane, is more than normally sensitive to your moods, Joseph.
So Joseph's state, tired, stressed, whatever, directly affected Jane's ability to receive the information clearly. That's a lot of pressure on the note-taker.
It really is. It highlights how interconnected they were in this process. But Seth is also reassuring. He says he is able to reinforce your energies, and he actually promises them that eventually they'll reach a point where they find their energies refreshed at the end of a session, not depleted.
That's the goal then,
Yeah.
sustainable energy exchange.
Right. And then, amidst all this deep stuff, we get this wonderfully human, almost comical interlude about the session length.
Ah, yes, Joseph's complaint. He wasn't happy. The session seemed shorter.
Apparently not. During a break, he mentioned being somewhat unhappy about this, maybe felt he wasn't getting enough cosmic wisdom per hour.
Huh. Bargain hunting for enlightenment.
Yeah.
How did Seth respond?
With this perfect blend of patience, logic, and slight impatience, he gives Joseph two very sensible reasons. First, he says he's getting the information through to Ruburt clearer, more concise fashion, basically cutting out unnecessary fluff. The transmission is just getting more efficient.
Okay, makes sense. Quality over quantity.
And second, he points out that he'd actually slowed down sometimes to make it easier for Joseph to keep up with the note-taking, especially since Joseph was tired. He's literally adjusting the pace for Joseph's writing comfort.
So he's helping Joseph, and Joseph is complaining about it. That's classic.
Isn't it? Seth playfully asks if these efforts aren't appreciated and sort of jokingly threatens to speed back up again, and then he throws in that line about Denmark.
Right. You want me to talk about Denmark? That's your trouble. What's that about?
Well, Joseph admits in his notes later that he had actually been thinking about Denmark earlier, just randomly grasping for a topic. Seth totally called him out on his mind wandering.
That's hilarious. It shows Seth is aware of their mental states on such a granular level, even while delivering complex philosophy. Joseph said Seth was being patient and amused.
Yeah, Joseph wrote Seth was being very patient and somewhat amused with me. It just adds such a layer of personality to the whole exchange.
And that ties into Seth's own comments about his personality, doesn't it? He admits he has moods too.
He does. It's a key moment for understanding the texture of the material. He says, I also, being still myself, have fluctuations of interest. That is, at times I am rather obsessed with getting hard facts through your heads, and at other times I am in a more humorous mood. I still have emotions.
He's basically saying, I'm a person too, even if I'm a non-physical energy personality essence, and that the material benefits from this range.
Exactly. He assures them the material will gain and not suffer from these fluctuations. It keeps it alive, dynamic. And his final bit of advice before signing off loops back beautifully to the start. He tells them to learn to listen and watch in a detached fashion.
Back to that observer state, letting the inner senses work without interference.
Right. And then comes the sign-off. After all that mind-bending cosmology and gentle ribbing.
The kicker.
Yeah. He says, and now, my Tootsies, I bid you a fond good evening.
My Tootsies. You just have to smile at that.
It's so unexpected, so affectionate, so bizarrely normal in a way. He follows it up by saying, you will find, if I may say so, that the material in tonight's session is of its usual high quality. Just a little pat on the back for himself and them.
It perfectly captures that blend of profound, chilling, and humorous that seems to define this session. Calling your channelers Tootsies after dismantling modern physics. Brilliant.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around all that. We went on quite a journey today.
We really did. From Jane's simple, practical vision of that clock, proving inner senses can deliver verifiable facts, maybe even better than outer ones.
Straight into Seth completely rejecting the expanding universe model, arguing instead that the universe is continually created and what we see as expansion is really a distortion.
Yeah, that reflection of a solid tree and water analogy, caused by the interaction, the boundary effects between these countless coexisting planes of reality.
And the big takeaway for you, the listener, seems to be about unlocking this stuff. It's not about straining or forcing. It's about the ego learning to step aside, to trust, to, as Seth put it, let go and dive.
That detachment is the key to accessing that direct inner experience, which is just as valid, or maybe more valid, than what our physical senses tell us.
And if the fundamental rules we perceive, time, space, velocity, are actually just components of our necessary physical camouflage shaped by these interplane boundary effects, Well, makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. What are the things that we accept as absolute facts, maybe about our own potential, our health, our creativity? Or if they're also just distortions, local rules of this specific camouflage system we're in?
Rules that the inner senses potentially can already see beyond, according to Seth.
Which leads to maybe a final thought for everyone to consider. We saw how the ego instantly panics and clamps down when a major physical law like gravity is threatened, like with levitation. It does that to protect our physical integrity within the camouflage.
Right, its survival mechanism kicks in.
So what kind of subtle, everyday control might that same mechanism be exerting? When we have a flash of intuition, a creative impulse that seems weird, or an urge to take an emotional risk, how often does the ego gently, almost invisibly, steer us back to the safe, known territory of the camouflage just to maintain stability?
Is that survival instinct inadvertently limiting our access to our deeper, multidimensional selves, just keeping us safely grounded in the physical illusion?
Something definitely worth thinking about.
Absolutely. And as always, we strongly encourage you to go to the source material itself. It's incredibly rich. We credit the Seth material and the publisher, New Awareness Network, for making all this available.
You can explore the early sessions, including session 42 that we discussed today, and check out their bookstore online at sethcenter.com for the early sessions. It's really worth the exploration.
It truly is. So until next time, try to practice that detached observation, maybe take a leap off that high dive board, and keep questioning the nature of the camouflage around you.
Good evening, everyone.